Many people sadly do not know the name of Kalief Browder, but they should. 22-year-old New York native took his own life in 2015, having spent 6 years in a criminal facility for a crime he didn't commit. So what do we know about the grim realities of juvenile detention? And why does this horrific facet of criminal justice go largely unnoticed? Stay with us to learn all about it. Kalief Browder is not an isolated case. Arrested for stealing a backpack, which incidentally he didn't do, the youth spent years in a system designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. Browder spent 3 years without being found guilty. Browder was released from prison at 19 and completely broken, beaten down by a system which encouraged daily beating and psychological trauma. He would never recover. Just 2 short years after he was released, he would take his own life, mentally scarred by his experience in the American penal system. Guilty or innocent, hundreds upon thousands of juveniles are subjected to this kind of fate every day, in a system and country which actively encourages the detention of its people thanks to privatized, for-profit prisons. We probably shouldn't be surprised to learn that some people in positions of authority are pre-programmed to abuse that power. This is certainly the case for a portion of employees working in the juvenile system in America. Oftentimes, it is the guards these children have to be most worried about, not their fellow inmates. Guards wield power with impunity and have been known to beat inmates for the slightest infractions. Just last year, the U.S. Department of Justice found unconstitutional conditions at all 5 of Texas's juvenile detention facilities, according to the Texas Tribune. But what does that mean? Well, children were reportedly subjected to excessive force, disabled children were discriminated against, and cases of sexual abuse were reported. There have also been allegations of guards forcing boys into gladiator-style battles to amuse themselves. Of course, this is flat-out child abuse and a serious abuse of power. One former inmate of the Louisiana system reported having his ribs broken for not getting out of bed fast enough. Other abuses include being hogtied, pepper-sprayed, or locked in restraints for hours. But what is the end goal? Why do these guards behave in such a way? Barring the obvious masochistic tendencies of some, it is seen by many as a form of control, a way to break an inmate. So for many of these children, survival simply means submission. One of the biggest fears hanging over the head of juvenile prisoners is solitary confinement. Any prisoner, for that matter, considered a form of torture for juveniles by international human rights organizations around the world. Unfortunately, it does still occur, and not just in third world countries where you might expect this sort of thing to be part and parcel of prison life, but in the United States as well. Occasionally, problem inmates can be forced to spend up to 23 hours per day crammed inside a tiny cell for days, weeks, months, and even years at a time. Shockingly, a recent study has suggested that it isn't only those perceived as problem prisoners who experience solitary confinement. The Child Crime Prevention and Safety Center claims that an incredible 35% of child offenders are held in solitary confinement at some point during their sentence, with more than half of that number spending more than 24 hours there at a time. Shocking! Kalief Browder reportedly spent 2 whole years in solitary, which clearly contributed to his mental state upon release. Once released from prison, Browder said, "I was losing my mind. I felt like I was suffocating in my own thoughts." It is well known that even a short time in solitary can lead to a myriad of mental health problems, from anxiety to hallucinations, and in the most severe cases, suicidal thoughts. Another horrific example from Wisconsin shows the extent of the problem in the Midwest state. A 2017 lawsuit revealed that around 15 to 20% of inmates at the Lincoln Hills juvenile correctional facilities had faced solitary confinement, often for periods of 30 to 60 days, according to Solitary Watch. In another shocking case, Sidney Briggs was awarded $18.9 million after suffering brain damage following a suicide attempt whilst in solitary. It really does tell you something about the state of things when truly dangerous prisoners, such as Charles Manson and Ted Kaczynski, were held within the general population. But children are being forced into solitary confinement. Of course, it's not only solitary these young offenders have to worry about. Sexual abuse is right up there alongside solitary when it comes to the worries of inmates. Sadly, in 2025, sexual abuse is rampant within youth offender facilities. It is often also at the hands of staff members these children are attacked. So, the very people who are supposed to be making sure these young people are safe are exploiting them for their own sexual gratification, which is tantamount to pedophilia. The Bureau of Justice Statistics suggests that around 10% of young offenders have, at one point or another, been subjected to sexual abuse. Sadly, whilst that number is 10% too many, it is probably a lot higher. Most victims, especially males, will keep these attacks to themselves, out of shame or the belief that they somehow deserve what is happening to them. The thought of vulnerable children being attacked in this manner, it of course, nauseating. Just last year, a group of almost 70 former juvenile offenders claimed they were sexually abused while serving in Pennsylvania facilities, which only serves to highlight just how widespread this problem is. Oftentimes, victims are threatened with solitary confinement if they speak out. The plaintiffs in the Pennsylvania case filed lawsuits accusing 10 separate facilities of abuse. 10. Disgraceful. A special report dated 2016 from the Bureau of Justice Statistics suggests that the number of reported cases from 2005 to 2012 hovers around the 800 mark. While some of these accusations will be false, in 2012, juvenile correctional administrators found 193 substantiated claims when followed up on. Staff sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and allegations of non-consensual acts within the juvenile system are sadly still taking place today, which proves that these problems are simply not going away. In an era when sexual misconduct in the workplace is, quite rightly, acted upon very quickly, it will sadden most people to know that this sort of thing is still rife within the juvenile correctional facility, where some of society's most vulnerable children are currently housed. Of course, there are other dangers too. Adult staff are not only in a position of power, they are also supposed to safeguarding these youngsters, but there are major concerns of neglect from within the juvenile system. Reports suggest that minors with chronic conditions such as asthma, diabetes, and epilepsy are often left with inadequate medical attention, with some emergency cases also occasionally going untreated. Medical neglect and malnutrition can and is occasionally used as another form of torture, but more often simply to keep children in line. If one fears they might not get fed properly, human nature dictates that they are more likely to toe the line. Sadly, where there is a lack of access to nutrition, there is going to be a knock-on effect on the health of these young offenders. A 2024 Harvard study suggested that children in detention lack adequate health care, which is hardly surprising in a nation with for-profit health care. However, the report also looked at children around the world and claimed that there are around 7 million children who are currently locked up, a truly eye-watering statistic. The report goes on to suggest that as many of these children are denied access to the health to which they are legally entitled, often with serious and long-lasting consequences. Children are often accused of faking health concerns in a bid for favorable situations in which they can spend time in the prison hospital. An incident from Lincoln Hills in Wisconsin saw one teenage beg for help when having an asthma attack, only for guards to deny him medical attention on these grounds. Lack of nutritious food is also used as a weapon. Many facilities will regularly serve rotten food or nutritionally inadequate food. Oftentimes, this is to save a buck, but just as often, it will be used as a form of punishment. There have been reports from some Florida detention centers of inmates resorting to eating toothpaste. Whilst malnutrition is the immediate concern, the underlying message is a truly grotesque one. You don't matter, of course. We all know that corruption runs through the American justice system, like blood runs through you or I. But a system built on profit and prejudice cannot and will not rehabilitate these children. What might be the most repulsive thing about the whole system is that there are men in suits and union groups who are actively campaigning for antiquated laws to stay in place so that beds will be filled in these houses of horror. In what might be the most disgusting but least talked about controversy of our generation, keeping people in prison means keeping others in a job. Awful. You might remember the Kids for Cash scandal a few years back. If you don't, then go look it up at the end of this video, in which it was revealed that 2 judges of the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, took home a whopping $2.8 million in bribes from for-profit detention centers in return for harsh sentencing for thousands of juveniles. These organizations were paying people who were trusted with a huge amount of power, who then abused that power to sentence children to prison time. Truly disgusting. In one case, a 14-year-old was handed a custodial sentence for accidentally trespassing in an abandoned building, and a 13-year-old was incarcerated after a food fight. Just last year, former American President Joe Biden commuted the sentence of the judges in question after it was deemed they had been successfully rehabilitated, suggesting the Old Boys Establishment Club is still well and truly alive. Whilst we all know about the racial disparities in American prisons, where black men are exponentially more likely to be locked up than their white counterparts, this horrific trend also stretches to the juvenile system. A black teenager is reportedly more than 6 times more likely to be locked up than a white teenager, which suggests we still have a long way to go with things such as racial profiling and equality in general. Whilst it is easy to listen and shake our collective heads at these statistics and horror stories, we must not forget that these are real lives, children's lives. These youths have been abandoned, abused, and failed, and it is up to us as a society to do something about it. The reality is that these institutions are rarely interested in rehabilitation. They are all about the bottom line. When you add sadistic prison wardens into the equation, then you have a recipe for disaster. This is not inevitable, though. This is a man-made choice. This is a man-made choice that society has made to keep the rich. Kalief Browder gave his life for these faceless men behind the scenes, but it doesn't have to be this way. So what can we do? We can demand justice. Social media is an excellent tool to bring attention to the plight of these children. Ending solitary confinement, sexual abuse, medical and malnutrition concerns shouldn't just be something we think about. It should be something we demand. Today, don't let these children suffer in silence. As always, thanks for joining us today, and be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great videos in future.